Hello. So I thought I would talk here about the albums I own of the Manic Street Preachers. So I showed one copy the other day of something I was getting rid of because I've got doubles of it. So Manic Street Preachers are a band that I think I mentioned in the other video that I kind of think I kind of hit and miss with me. I really like some of their stuff, and then some of their stuff I find to be a bit too, I guess, boring. Is just what I'd say. But in saying that, I'd say they don't really have any bad music. I've never heard a Manic Street Preachers song that I just think that's a terrible song. Some of it I just kind of I think is a bit forgettable, but like I said, there's a lot of stuff of these that I also really like a lot. So I'll go through what I have in the chronological order of what I have. So the first three albums I don't have: Generation Terrorists, Gold Against the Soul, and the Holy Bible. I owned Generation Terrorists probably about 15 years ago, but I sold it, I remember, when I was moving overseas at some stage and never rebought it. But Everything Must Go. I've owned this three times. I owned it probably about 20 years ago, and I actually think I still have just the disc and not the case. But anyway, I rebought this secondhand in the last 3 years, and I showed the other copy I have, which I'm going to get rid of because I don't need doubles of it. This was their this was their first post Richie Edwards album. So Richie Edwards was their second guitarist and one of the lyricists, together with Nicky, and he disappeared, I think, in 1995. And a lot of people thought that they wouldn't continue without him, but they did, and this is the first album that they made afterwards with the three remaining members. So you got Sean Moore on the left, James Dean Bradfield in the middle, and Nicky Wire on the right. So actually, I read a biography of the band. It was a long time ago now, and a lot has changed since that biography came out. It would have been probably about 20 years ago, early 2000s, 2003, 2004. And a lot of it was focused on them growing up, their kind of childhood and teen years in Wales, and just kind of before the band got signed and stuff. And it was quite interesting to see how close they were as friends. James, Nicky, and Richie and Sean. But Sean kind of had his sounded like he had his own life as well. Like he had a girlfriend, and he wasn't as tied to the others as much in their youth. But he's actually James's cousin. Sean and James are cousins. But yeah, they were very very close as friends growing up, and a lot of the time was just kind of spent in each other's bedrooms, kind of like dreaming of being in a band. And so that kind of makes Richie's disappearance even more, I would say, like tragic or whatever. But it would have affected them more than maybe the average band. A lot of bands are almost just kind of businesses. The guys are not friends. They kind of find each other through advertising for, we need a guitarist or we need a drummer or whatever. And so, the relationship is different. But these guys actually, grew up together and had friendships before they were in a band. And yeah. Anyway, I'm kind of a rambling bit here, but this is a very good album. Everything Must Go. It's a very solid album. As in, I don't think there's really a bad song on it. The first half in particular is very good. Design for Life was I think their biggest single up to this point. I think it got to number 2 in the UK charts, or in the English. Is there a difference between the Scottish and English charts? Whatever. It got to number 2 in the chart, and so in some ways this was kind of their big breakthrough album, because the three before this they had found middling success, They had a few, I think, top 20 singles before, and I think the Holy Bible sold pretty well. But this was kind of their first big success in the mainstream. Okay, so I said Holy Bible went gold in the UK. I thought it would sold actually more than that, to be honest, but apparently not. Anyway, so what I have next is their next album, which is Know Your Enemy. Now, when this came out, actually, sorry, I'm skipping over one, aren't I? I'm skipping over this one, which is, I guess, kind of matches my feeling, because I never really been the biggest fan of this album. This is probably their biggest selling album of their career. This is the one where they got a number one with If You Tolerate This, Then Your Children Will Be Next, and they won a lot of awards, and it did very well critically. Like, it got some good critical reviews. It had 5 singles. But for me, I don't know. This album just kind of I don't know how to really explain it. There's some good songs on it, and there's some good lyrics on it. You know, both Nicky Wire and Richie Edwards are very original and unique lyricists. And you can look at a Manic Street Preachers song and very often automatically recognize it as theirs, because they reference a lot of cultural figures, literary figures. For example, If You Tolerate This, Your Children Will Be Next is about the Spanish Civil War, which is not a typical subject of the average rock pop band, is it? But if you read it, he's talking about the international brigades that volunteered in the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, fighting against the nationalist / I guess you maybe call fascist Franco's army, Franco's forces. But yeah, my feelings about this album is it's not a bad album at all. It's just, I feel it's, I don't know, dry, maybe is a word I'd use to describe it. It's just, it doesn't do a lot for me. I find it quite forgettable. And that's how I felt for a long time, the first time I heard it. So yeah. Then they follow that up with Know Your Enemy. And Know Your Enemy is probably my favorite album of theirs, which might be a bit strange because it's actually an album that's kind of not really talked about a lot by the band themselves or fans. And even the band themselves I've read some things. A few years ago I read them, and then when I was reading again this morning, I saw some other kind of quite negative things they have to say about the album, which kind of surprised me, but I don't know. For me, it appeals to me. I was listening through to it the other day, and it was almost like there's not for me, there's not a bad song on it. I think Miss Europa Disco Dance is a little bit cheesy, but I think that's the intention. Quite a few singles off. There's I Found That Soul was a single, Ocean Spray was a single, So I Was So Sad was a single, Let Robson Sing was a single. I really like the song Intravenous Agnostic. I also really like Wattsville Blues, which that got really slated critically, I remember when it came out, because that's a Nicky Wire song. Nicky Wire singing vocals, which obviously is not the norm. And his voice, he hasn't got the most tuneful voice. At least he didn't back then. I think he's improved his singing subsequently, but back then, he couldn't really carry a tune at all. But I like it. I like the rawness of that song, and it kind of it uses a drum machine in the first part, and then James and him sing both sing vocals in the chorus, which I think their voices work well together. So this is what Sean Moore had to say about this album. He said, The songs include, so this is what I've heard. Apparently, it's meant to be two separate albums, but they ended up putting them all together. So that's why it's quite of a, there is quite a it's not maybe not cohesive in that way in the sound ways that you can hear. There's some quite pretty songs together with quite some raw, um, what's the word like raw, kind of unfinished songs maybe is but I like that aspect of it. But he says for this reason, because they put the two together, he finds the album to be strange and confusing. And Nicky Wire reflected on the album in 2021, so this is almost 20 years after it's come out. Musically, I was particularly lazy and destructive, constantly saying it's too tight, can't we use the demo? Too many lyrics just weren't finished. The original idea was to have two albums, one called Solidarity after the Polish trade union movement, and one called Door to the River, which was the softer side. James just looked at me, why are you trying to do this? Why are you trying to do this weird shit all the time? In a nice way. But yeah, I think that's what kind of I like about it, the two sides of it and the rawness and aspects of it. If you didn't know their politics, it would be kind of hard to ignore them because especially in the early work, they're quite strident in their, I guess what you'd say in the classical term, socialism. Socialism as it was in the late 20th century. And this was, they went on to perform in Cuba for Castro. They met Fidel Castro. They wrote a song, was it Baby Elian, which is about Elian Gonzalez, the little kid who went to America with his mum. I think his mum died on the way there. They were, escaping on a rubber dinghy. And then his father ended up trying to get him back to Cuba, and there was a big international kind of dispute, and they ended up sending him back. And but yeah, I don't say what much else to say about it. I really like the album. A lot of people don't. A lot of people think it's kind of all over the place. It sounds like the band also feel the same way, but probably my favorite album of this. What was next after Know Your Enemy? Forever Delayed. No, sorry, that was the B-sides one, was it? And then the actual next, no, Lipstick Traces was the B-sides one. The actual next album was Lifeblood. I've barely listened to Lifeblood. And the song I did hear was The Love of Richard Nixon, which features on this, which is a best of compilation, National Treasures, the complete singles. So this is every single they've released. So The Love of Richard Nixon and Empty Souls are the two ones from Lifeblood. They're the only two I've ever heard. I haven't listened to the rest of the album. I remember they got pretty poor reviews, but now looking here, it has quite mixed reviews. Q Magazine, which is what I read on, gave it 1.5 stars out of 5, whereas it gets 9 out of 10 on Drowned in Soul. Yeah, it's just I don't really have much to say about that album because I haven't really listened to it, but this is a good collection of all their works. It's a double disc, starting with their first single, Motown Junk, which was, that was a pre-album single, I think, before Generation Terrorist came out. Stay Beautiful, Love Sweet Exile, You Love Us. Theme from MASH, they did a cover of Suicide is Painless back then, and I think that was their first highest charting. I think it got to number 7 in the UK charts. Then we got the singles from Holy Bible and from Gold on the Soul. From Despair to Where, I like that song. Faster, I think Faster was no, I may have heard Motorcycle Emptiness before that, but yeah, I would have been quite young, but I'm pretty sure Faster was the very first song I ever heard of theirs, because it was on a compilation I got when I was about 14 called The Trip 4, and it had, like, I remember it had REM and what else did it have on it? Hole, I think Green Day. Anyway, it had a whole bunch of songs, and I remember it had Faster by them. And I think that was the very first song I heard of theirs. That would have been back in about 95. Pre Everything Must Go. Fast is a great song. Great lyrics. Talking about saying that, again, that they reference a lot of a lot of literary figures. That song references what Norman Mailer, Harold Pinter, Sylvia Plath. I'm stronger than Miller and Mailer. Henry Miller, Miller and Mailer, spat out Plath and Pinter. Which, when I was a kid, I didn't even know who any of those people were. Subsequently, going to learn about who they are, and maybe you get the references. But yes, a lot of it was over my head as a young man. I got the singles from Everything Must Go, and then on to... So it goes right up to the one after Lifeblood, which was Send Away the Tigers. And that is the one that they did a duet with Nina Pearson from the Cardigans on Your Love Alone Is Not Enough. I like that song. Very catchy, very memorable hook, that song. Autumn Song, Indian Summer. And then I think the last one was not this one. Do they have any singles from this one? I think it was from the one after this, which was Postcards from a Young Man. Yes. Okay, so right up to 2011, Postcards from a Young Man. They had all the singles. This one I don't think this had any singles. Yeah, it didn't. They didn't release any singles from this. This was released in 2009, and this I like a lot as well. This, conceptually, the idea of... Well, not the idea, but they used only lyrics from Richie on this. So when Richie disappeared, when this was released, it would have been about 15 years before, he left a lot of work behind. I think he actually gave them the binder of lyrics before he left. They didn't know he was going to disappear or whatever he went on to do, take his own life. No one really knows, do they? But before that, I think him and James were staying in a hotel. He gave James the lyrics, kind of just like, oh, hold on to these for me, will you? And so they used some on Everything Must Go, and I think bits and pieces throughout. But then on this album they use entirely Richie's lyrics. And I like this album because it feels, again, it's got that more raw feeling to it, this album. There's a quote from George Bernard Shaw, again, always with the literary references. A life spent making mistakes is not only more memorable, but more useful than a life spent doing nothing. Well, yes and no. Well, yeah, I guess you could say yes. But if your mistakes are affecting other people, then is that really a good thing? Yeah, I don't know. The song I like the most on this album is track 2, Jackie Collins' Existential Question Time. There's Richie. A beautiful young man, wasn't he? I went through a stage probably about 20 years ago, probably at the time when I was reading that biography of them, that he's an intriguing figure. I guess, if you read it, he barely played guitar in the band. Like, he was apparently, from all accounts, a terrible guitarist. To the point that they would turn him down on stage in the mix because it wouldn't sound so good, and he could only play like a handful of chords. Sometimes he just wouldn't do anything. But he was there. He was still an important part of the band. He was a lyricist and just as a creative force within the unit. But he was very self-destructive, and he had a lot of issues, mentally and otherwise, maybe. And because of his disappearance, they've never found a body, and so they can't say for sure what happened to him. It's a very kind of, I guess, romantic, and I mean romantic in the poetic, metaphorical sense, not romantic as in the love sense. A very romantic kind of story of this young, handsome man, had so many demons, and kind of gave away the fame and fortune that was there for him to take, and chose to kind of, whether it be to disappear and to kind of fade into obscurity, or to take his own life, which so many artists had done before him. But anyway, that's what I own as far as that band goes. like I said, I'm kind of black and white. Oh, not black and white. Kind of, I have both sides feeling about them. But the things that I do have of theirs, for the most part, I really like. So we'll leave it there. Thanks for watching.